My little brother stopped talking when he was 9 years old. Not selectively mute, not traumatized in any obvious way. He just stopped. The child psychologists in Portland had theories. Delayed grief response from our father's death 2 years prior. Social anxiety manifesting as elective mutism, a developmental disorder that had somehow gone undetected. They prescribed therapy, communication boards, patience. What they didn't know, what none of us knew for 3 years, was that Jamie had found something in the forests of the Columbia River Gorge that had given him a better reason to stay silent than any psychological diagnosis could explain. I was 19 when I discovered the truth, home from my first year at Oregon State for winter break in December 2003. Our mother worked double shifts as an ER nurse, leaving me to watch Jamie, now 12, during the holiday weeks. He seemed content with his silence, communicating through notes and gestures, spending hours in the woods behind our property with sketchbooks he never let anyone see, until the night I followed him into the snow-covered forest and found him sitting beside a creature that shouldn't exist, both of them drawing by lantern light, sharing a silence that was its own form of conversation. That was the night I understood. Some secrets are kept not out of fear, but out of love. Our house sat at the edge of national forest land, a small cabin our father had built himself near Cascade Locks, Oregon. Behind us rose steep slopes of Douglas fir and western hemlock, cut through by ravines where winter creeks ran swift and cold. It was isolated. Our nearest neighbor was 2 miles down the logging road, but beautiful in the way only the Pacific Northwest can be. Green so deep it's almost black, mist that hung like gauze between the trees, the constant sound of water moving over stone. Jamie had always loved the forest. Even before he stopped talking, he'd spend hours exploring, returning with pockets full of interesting rocks, feathers, seed pods. After Dad died, sudden cardiac arrest at 42, no warning, Jamie retreated deeper into those woods. Mom was too buried in grief and work to worry about it beyond basic safety. I was away at college, calling weekly, coming home monthly, but missing the subtle shifts in my brother's behavior. When I arrived for winter break, I noticed things immediately. Jamie had filled 3 entire sketchbooks with drawings, intricate, detailed illustrations of plants, animals, landscapes. His artistic skill had exploded in my absence, progressing from childlike representations to something approaching professional naturalist documentation. But there were other drawings too, partial sketches, quickly hidden when I approached. Large humanoid figures, always incomplete, always obscured by trees or shadows, and hand studies, massive hands with opposable thumbs and carefully rendered dermal ridges. "These are really good," I told him, pointing to a detailed rendering of a Roosevelt elk. "Are you taking art classes at school?" He shook his head, wrote on his notepad, "Self-taught. The forest is my teacher. What about these?" I indicated one of the partial figure drawings before he could flip the page. His hand moved protectively over the sketchbook. He wrote, "Just imagination." I didn't push. Jamie communicated when he was ready. Forcing him only made him withdraw further. But I noticed other things. He'd started leaving the house after dinner, taking a backpack filled with supplies, food, always food, more than one kid could eat. Apples, dried salmon strips Mom bought in bulk, jars of peanut butter, loaves of bread. He'd be gone for 2, sometimes 3 hours, returning cold and tired, but with an expression I could only describe as peaceful. "Where does he go?" I asked Mom during one of her rare evenings home. She barely looked up from her medical journals. "Into the woods. He has a fort or something. Kid needs his space, especially with everything he's been through. For 3 hours, in the dark, in winter. He always comes back safe. He knows those woods better than anyone." She rubbed her temples, exhausted. "Sarah, I can't fight every battle. He's not talking, but he's not self-harming, not acting out, not failing school. The therapist says to let him have his coping mechanisms. But this felt like more than a coping mechanism. This felt like purpose." On his 3rd evening out that week, I made a decision. When Jamie left the house at 7 p.m. with his loaded backpack and a camping lantern, I waited 10 minutes and followed. The December night was clear and brutally cold, temperature dropping into the 20s. Fresh snow from 2 days prior covered the ground, making tracking easy. Jamie's footprints led up the familiar trail toward Greenleaf Creek, then diverged onto a barely visible game trail that climbed into steeper terrain. I followed at a distance, staying quiet, using the moon's reflection off snow for navigation. After 40 minutes, I saw lantern light ahead, a warm glow emanating from a small clearing sheltered by a massive fallen cedar. and I heard something that made my breath catch. My brother's voice, actually speaking. Words I couldn't distinguish, but unmistakably Jamie's voice, which I hadn't heard in 3 years. He wasn't talking to himself. I crept closer, using the fallen cedar as cover, until I could see into the clearing. What I witnessed made my entire understanding of reality tilt sideways. Jamie sat on a flat rock, his lantern between him and something else. Someone else. A figure so large it made my 12-year-old brother look tiny by comparison, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, sitting cross-legged with its back against a standing cedar tree. A Sasquatch. An actual living, breathing Sasquatch. My first instinct was to scream, to grab Jamie and run. But something stopped me. The scene was too calm, too familiar. This wasn't a dangerous encounter. This was routine. Jamie was showing the creature his sketchbook, holding it up so it could see the drawings. And the creature was looking, actually studying the pages with obvious interest, making soft vocalizations that sounded almost conversational. "I added the background today," Jamie said, his voice rusty from disuse but clear. "See how the light comes through the canopy? That's how it looked yesterday morning." The creature made a sound, a low rumble that might have been approval, and reached out one massive hand. Jamie passed him the sketchbook without hesitation, and I watched in stunned silence as this impossible being held the book with surprising delicacy, examining the drawing of a winter forest scene. Then the creature picked up a stick of charcoal from a small collection of art supplies arranged on a nearby rock. He opened to a blank page and began to draw. His movements were careful, deliberate, surprisingly skilled. Within minutes I could see a shape emerging, a figure that might have been Jamie, rendered in bold strokes, sitting beside what was clearly a representation of the creature himself. "That's us," Jamie said softly, delight in his voice. "That's really good. Your shading has gotten better." They were teaching each other, two beings who shouldn't even be able to communicate, sharing art, spending time together in the frozen silence of a winter forest. The creature finished his drawing and showed it to Jamie, who grinned, something I hadn't seen in months. "Can I keep it?" The creature carefully tore the page from the sketchbook and handed it to Jamie, who accepted it like it was precious treasure. Then Jamie unpacked his backpack. Sandwiches, apples, a thermos of what looked like hot soup. He arranged the food on a flat rock, and the creature accepted it with a soft vocalization that sounded unmistakably like gratitude. They ate together, my brother and this impossible being, comfortable in each other's presence. "She's worried about me," Jamie said after a while, presumably talking about Mom. "Sarah too, now that she's home. They want me to talk more, to be normal." The creature made a questioning sound. "But talking to them means lying. They'll ask where I go, what I do. I'd have to make up stories, and I'm terrible at lying." Jamie picked at his sandwich. "It's easier to just not talk. Then I don't have to choose between protecting you and being honest." The weight of that statement hit me like a physical blow. My brother had chosen silence, had endured years of therapy, concern, social isolation, to protect this being. He'd sacrificed his own voice to keep this secret safe. The creature reached out and placed one enormous hand on Jamie's shoulder. The gesture was gentle, protective, full of understanding. Then it made a series of sounds while gesturing toward Jamie, toward the forest, toward where our house would be. Jamie shook his head. "I know you worry too, but I'm okay, I promise. This," he gestured between them, "this is worth it." I realized I was crying, tears freezing on my cheeks in the cold night air. My little brother, who everyone thought was broken, had been carrying the weight of the most profound secret in the world, and he'd been doing it alone. I must have made a sound, a sharp intake of breath, a shifted foot on frozen ground, because the creature's head whipped toward my position with alarming speed. Its entire body tensed, transforming in an instant from gentle companion to something wild and potentially dangerous. Jamie followed the creature's gaze, his eyes going wide when he saw me. "Sarah," he whispered, the word almost lost in the night air. I stood slowly, hands raised, stepping into the lantern light. "Jamie, it's okay. I'm not going to—" What? Scream? Run? Tell someone? I didn't know how to finish that sentence. The creature rose to its full height, easily 8 feet tall, with shoulders so broad it could probably snap me in half without effort. It positioned itself between Jamie and me, protective, making a low warning sound that vibrated in my chest. "It's my sister," Jamie said quickly, placing a hand on the creature's arm, a gesture of reassurance. She's safe. She won't hurt us. Us. He said us. The creature didn't relax, but it didn't attack either. Amber eyes studied me with an intelligence that was almost unbearable to witness. This wasn't an animal evaluating threat. This was a person making complex judgments about intention, relationship, risk. "I'm sorry," I said, voice shaking. "I was worried about you. I just wanted to know you were safe." "I am safe," Jamie replied, and there was such certainty in his voice. "Probably safer than anywhere else in the world." "Jamie, I gestured helplessly at the creature. Who is? How long has this been happening?" 3 years. Since right after Dad died. Jamie's voice cracked on the last word. "I found him in a ravine. He'd been caught in a flash flood, injured his leg. He was trapped and I helped him." The creature made a soft sound, and I understood. Confirmation. Memory. "You were 9 years old," I said, trying to process this. "You found a Sasquatch and decided to help it?" "Him," Jamie corrected firmly. "Not it. Him. His name is—" He made a sound I couldn't replicate. A low vocalization with complex tones. I can't say it right, but that's what he calls himself. I looked at the creature, at him, and saw him watching this exchange with obvious comprehension. He understood we were discussing him. He understood Jamie was defending him. "Does he talk?" I asked. "I mean, does he understand English?" "He understands tone, intention, a lot of words, but his vocal structure is different. He can't make our sounds, just like we can't make his." Jamie pulled out his sketchbook, showing me pages filled with symbols, complex glyphs and patterns. "We developed this. It's like sign language but drawn. We can communicate pretty complex ideas." I stared at the pages, at evidence of something that would revolutionize anthropology, linguistics, our entire understanding of intelligence and communication. "Jamie, this is incredible. This is a secret," he interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "It has to stay secret, Sarah. That's why I stopped talking. Because if people knew, they'd come looking. They'd want to study him, capture him, maybe hurt him, and I can't let that happen." The creature moved slightly, and I saw him more clearly in the lantern light. The gray around his muzzle, the old scar across his shoulder, the way he favored his right leg. He wasn't some pristine specimen. He was an individual who'd lived, survived, endured. "How many are there?" I asked. Jamie and the creature exchanged a glance. Some silent communication passing between them. Then Jamie said quietly, "Not enough. Not nearly enough." I sat in that clearing for 2 hours while Jamie explained everything. How he'd found the creature. He refused to use him as anything but a person, which I came to respect, trapped and injured in a ravine. How he'd brought food and water over several weeks while the leg healed. How communication had developed gradually. Gestures, drawings, simple cause and effect demonstrations evolving into their complex symbol system. "He's taught me things," Jamie said, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "About the forest, about survival, about paying attention. He knows which plants are medicinal, how to predict weather changes, how to move through terrain without leaving traces. He's lived here his whole life, maybe 60 years, based on what I can understand. This forest is his home." The creature, I tried thinking of him as Jamie's friend, which helped, watched our conversation with focused attention. Occasionally he'd make vocalizations or gestures that Jamie would translate. "He's asking if you're going to tell others," Jamie said. I looked into those amber eyes and saw the question there. Trust or threat? "I don't know," I admitted. "I need to think." That answer seemed to satisfy him more than a quick promise would have. Intelligence recognizes honesty. We walked back to the house together, Jamie and me, leaving his friend in the clearing. The whole way my brother talked, words flowing after 3 years of silence, explaining the moral framework he'd built around his secret. "Everyone wants proof of Bigfoot," he said. "TV shows, researchers, hunters. But what happens if they get it? He becomes property. Government property, scientific property. He's the last of something, Sarah. There might be a few others in the Cascades, but they're dying out. Habitat loss, isolation, maybe just bad luck. And if the world finds out, the last years of his species will be spent in captivity. Or he could be protected," I argued, playing devil's advocate even as I felt the weakness of the position. "Endangered Species Act. Habitat preservation. That works for animals that can't understand they're being managed. He's not a spotted owl. He's a person with autonomy, with the right to choose how he lives." Jamie stopped on the trail, looking at me with Dad's eyes. "Would you want to be the last human even if aliens promised to protect you in the nicest zoo imaginable?" I couldn't argue with that. At home, I lay awake until 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling. My phone sat on the nightstand, one call away from changing everything. I could contact the Forest Service, anthropology departments, news media. I had first-hand testimony, could lead them to the clearing, provide sketches and symbols and descriptions that would revolutionize multiple scientific fields. My career would be made. I was studying wildlife biology. This discovery would guarantee me placement anywhere, research funding, publications. I'd be the person who proved they existed, but I'd also be the person who destroyed Jamie's trust and ended the freedom of a being who'd chosen to remain hidden. I'd be complicit in whatever happened next. The cameras, the expeditions, the inevitable capture or harassment. The next morning, over coffee Mom made before her shift, I asked, "Have you noticed Jamie's been happier lately?" She smiled, tired but genuine. "He does seem more settled. Maybe the therapy is finally working." Not therapy. Connection. Purpose. A friendship that transcended species, built on mutual respect and shared silence. "Mom, if Jamie started talking again but you found out he'd been keeping a big secret, something weird, maybe something that would worry you, would you want to know?" She studied me over her coffee mug. "Is this hypothetical?" "Maybe. Then hypothetically, I'd say I trust Jamie's judgment and I'd trust yours too." She set down her mug. "Some secrets are kept for good reasons. Unless someone's in danger, sometimes it's better not to ask." I made my decision that evening when Jamie prepared to leave for the forest. "I'm coming with you," I said. "If that's okay?" He studied me, trying to read my intention. "You decided." I decided. "Your secret is safe with me." Relief flooded his face, and suddenly he looked 12 again instead of carrying the weight of someone much older. "Thank you. God, Sarah, thank you." In the clearing, Jamie's friend was waiting. When he saw me, his posture tensed slightly, still wary, but Jamie spoke to him in their mixed language of sounds and symbols, explaining. I watched the creature's face carefully and saw the moment understanding arrived. I was choosing alliance over exposure. He made a deep vocalization. Not quite words, but the meaning was clear. Gratitude. Over the following weeks of my winter break, I became part of their routine. I learned to read the creature's vocalizations, to understand his gestures, to communicate through the symbol system Jamie had developed. I learned his story in fragments. A small family group, reduced over decades through accidents, disease, and the simple mathematics of a failing population. He'd lost his mate 5 years prior, had no offspring, was possibly one of the last of his kind in this region. He asks me sometimes about the human world, Jamie translated one evening. What we learn, how we communicate over distances, why we build things. He's curious about technology but understands why showing himself would end his freedom. I watched the creature. I'd started thinking of him as Elder, a name that felt more respectful than an assigned human name, sketching in Jamie's notebook. He drew the forest with a perspective that was slightly different from human sight, angles that suggested he saw the world from 8 feet up, in different light spectrums perhaps, with different priorities for what mattered. What will happen to him? I asked Jamie privately. If he's the last or nearly the last, then we witness, Jamie said simply. We make sure his last years are peaceful. We remember. Maybe that's all we can do. But I wanted to do more. I started researching quietly, carefully, never revealing why, about isolated populations, genetic bottlenecks, the ethics of intervention with endangered intelligent species. I found no answers, because the academic world didn't even acknowledge the species existed. One night, Elder showed us something remarkable. He led us deeper into the forest, to a cave system I'd never known existed. Inside, the walls were covered with drawings, ochre and charcoal, some fresh, some clearly ancient, handprints, hunting scenes, representations of the forest through seasons, a visual history of his people, stretching back what might have been centuries. He's the last keeper, Jamie whispered, his voice echoing softly, the last one who remembers all the stories. Elder touched the walls gently, reverently, and made a sound of profound sorrow. Then he looked at Jamie and made gestures. You remember, you keep, you carry forward. He's asking me to remember, Jamie said, tears running down his face, to be the witness after he's gone. I understood then the full weight of what my brother had taken on. This wasn't just a friendship, it was a covenant. Jamie had become the keeper of knowledge that would otherwise vanish from the world, the bridge between two kinds of intelligence, the witness to an ending. And by choosing to protect the secret, I'd become part of that covenant too. We spent the next hour sketching the cave paintings, documenting symbols and patterns while Elder watched approvingly. This evidence would never be published, never verified by science, never change textbooks, but it would exist, preserved in Jamie's careful drawings, carried in our memories. Some truths are too important to be proven. Some responsibilities transcend career and credibility. The complication arrived in February, 2 weeks after I'd returned to Oregon State. Mom called, her voice tight with controlled panic. The logging company's expanding operations. They're surveying timber tracts right behind our property, the areas where Jamie spends his time. My stomach dropped. When? Survey crew arrives in 3 days. They're flagging trees, mapping access roads. If they approve the tract, logging starts in spring. I drove home that weekend, arriving Friday night. Jamie was in his room, surrounded by topographic maps and sketches, his face drawn with worry. Elder knows, he said without preamble. He can hear the survey work to the north. He's scared, Sarah. I've never seen him scared before. Where can he go? There's wilderness to the east, but it's across the Columbia River. He'd have to come down into the gorge. Exposed territory, populated areas. And I don't know if there are others there or if he'd be in someone else's territory. Jamie's hands shook as he pointed to the map. He's lived here his whole life. This is his home. The survey crew set up their base camp Monday morning. 3 men with bright orange vests, GPS equipment, and the casual efficiency of people doing routine work. They were just doing their jobs, identifying timber value, following regulations. They had no idea they were mapping the destruction of someone's entire world. I intercepted them on a trail Wednesday, playing the concerned local resident. How far back are you surveying? The crew chief, a man named Martinez, showed me the boundary maps. About 2,000 acres. Good timber density, primarily Douglas fir and hemlock. Sustainable harvest plan. We're leaving buffer zones around creeks, following best practices. The area included Elder's core territory, the cave with the ancient drawings, the ravine where Jamie had first found him, the clearing where they met. What about wildlife? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Standard assessments, spotted owl surveys, environmental impact studies. If we find critical habitat, we adjust the plan. What if there were endangered species you didn't know about? Undocumented species. Martinez smiled indulgently. Then someone needs to document them. That's how protection works. You prove the species exists, prove it's threatened, then legal mechanisms kick in. He packed up his equipment. But in 30 years of forestry work, I've never seen anything that wasn't already in the books, because the undocumented species were smart enough to hide. That evening, the 3 of us met in the clearing, Jamie, Elder, and me. My brother tried to explain the situation using their symbol system, drawing maps in the dirt, showing boundaries and time frames. Elder understood. The grief in his posture was unmistakable. He made a long, complex vocalization, and Jamie translated haltingly. He says his people have been moving for generations. Every time humans expand, they move. But there's nowhere left to move to. The forests keep getting smaller, the safe spaces fewer. There has to be something we can do, I said. Jamie shook his head. The only thing that would stop the logging is protected status, and that requires proof that he exists. We'd have to expose him to save his home. The cruelty of the choice was staggering. Protect his freedom and lose his home, or prove his existence and lose his freedom. There was no third option. Elder seemed to sense our distress. He moved closer to Jamie, placing a massive hand on his shoulder, a gesture they'd developed over 3 years of friendship. Then he did something I'd never seen before. He pulled Jamie into an embrace. Gentle, careful, profoundly sad. My brother sobbed against Elder's chest, and I turned away to give them privacy for their grief. I called in sick to my classes and stayed home the following week. If Elder's home was going to be destroyed, we'd document everything first. Jamie and I spent hours in the cave, carefully sketching every drawing, every symbol, every handprint on those ancient walls. We photographed the clearing, the trails, the marking trees. We recorded Elder's vocalizations, though we knew we'd never share them. Why are we doing this? Jamie asked on the 3rd day, his voice hollow. What's the point if no one will ever see it? Because someone should remember, I said, even if it's just us. His people existed, they had culture and history and art. That deserves to be remembered. Elder watched us work with an expression I can only describe as resigned appreciation. He understood. This was memorial documentation, preservation against oblivion. On Thursday evening, something unexpected happened. Elder led us to a different part of his territory, to a steep ravine we'd never explored. At the bottom, sheltered by a natural rock overhang, was another cave, smaller, harder to access, invisible from above. He gestured inside, and we found more drawings, but also something else. Depressions in the ground that might have been sleeping areas, fire-blackened stones, tools made from shaped rocks and hardened wood, evidence of habitation, perhaps centuries old. Elder made urgent vocalizations, and Jamie understood. He's showing us a refuge, a place he can hide when the logging starts. He wants us to know where he'll be. How long can you survive here? I asked, looking at the cramped space, the limited access to water and food. The answer was in Elder's eyes. Not forever, but long enough for the immediate danger to pass. This isn't living, Jamie said, his voice breaking. This is just surviving. That night I lay awake wrestling with the impossible choice. I could make one phone call, share what we'd witnessed, bring the full weight of scientific and government attention to this forest. Elder would be discovered, protected under endangered species legislation, his habitat preserved, but he'd never be free again. His existence would be managed, studied, controlled. The last years of his life, maybe the last years of his entire species, would be spent under observation, his privacy destroyed, his autonomy eliminated. Or I could stay silent, protect his freedom and watch him lose his home. Watch him hide in a cave while his forest was dismantled around him. Maybe he'd survive the logging operation, move to marginal territory, eke out a few more years. But eventually, the shrinking wilderness would claim him just as surely as captivity would. There was no good choice, only different flavors of loss. Friday morning I found Jamie in the clearing at dawn before Elder arrived. What would Dad do? He asked me. I thought about our father, a man who'd chosen a simple life in the forest over career advancement in the city, who'd taught us that some things mattered more than money or status or conventional success. Dad would ask what honors the friendship, I said finally. Not what saves the habitat or makes the better scientific decision, but what honors the relationship between you and Elder. Jamie nodded slowly. Elder chose to stay hidden. That's been his choice for 60 years, probably the choice of his people for centuries. Even facing extinction, he's choosing freedom over safety. He looked at me. Who are we to take that choice away from him? Even if it means losing him? Even then, Jamie's voice was steady now, certain, because respect means honoring someone's choices, even when we think they're wrong. I pulled my phone from my pocket and deleted every photo we'd taken, every video, every piece of digital evidence. The logging began in April. We watched from a distance as trucks rolled in, as chainsaws bit into ancient trees, as Elder's territory slowly contracted. He retreated to the hidden cave and we brought him supplies, food, water, blankets for the cold nights. He accepted our help with quiet dignity, but we could see him diminishing, not physically, but spiritually. Something essential was being cut away along with those trees. The operation lasted 3 months. By July, 2,000 acres had been sustainably harvested, leaving buffer zones and young growth but fundamentally transforming the landscape. The cave with the ancient drawings survived. It was in a protected riparian zone, but the approaches were compromised, the privacy destroyed. I spent that summer at home deferring my fall semester. Jamie and I helped Elder adjust to his reduced territory, finding new routes that avoided human sightlines, identifying alternate food sources. But we could see the toll it took. He moved slower, spent more time in the hidden cave, seemed less engaged during our visits. He's giving up, Jamie said in August. Not dying, but letting go. One evening in late September, Elder brought us to the cave with the ancient drawings one last time. He spent an hour touching the walls, making soft vocalizations we understood as remembering. Then he took charcoal and added one final drawing. 3 figures sitting together. 2 small, 1 large. A human child, a human adult, and something else. A friendship that transcended species. A bridge between worlds. Below the drawing, he made marks that looked almost like writing. Jamie understood. He says this is the last chapter. After him, the walls will remember what his voice cannot. We never saw him again. Whether he moved to distant territory, succumbed to age, or simply chose to die in privacy, we don't know. His hidden cave was empty when we checked a month later. No body, no signs of distress, just absence. Jamie started talking again after that, not openly but to family, To therapists, Mom thought we're finally making progress. He never explained what had changed, and I never told. He's 21 now, studying anthropology with a focus on indigenous knowledge systems and cultural preservation. His thesis work focuses on oral traditions, on knowledge that dies when the last speaker dies, on the ethics of cultural documentation. He's preparing in his own way to be the keeper of a story he can never fully tell. I became a conservation biologist, like I planned, but with a different focus. I work on habitat corridors, on preserving connectivity between wilderness fragments, on fighting for roadless areas and old-growth protection. When people ask why I'm so passionate about preserving forests that have no obvious commercial or recreational value, I tell them about biodiversity and ecosystem services and climate regulation. I don't tell them I'm trying to preserve refuge for beings who may or may not still exist, who deserve space to live and die with dignity, unseen and unmanaged. In my office, I keep a sketchbook filled with drawings from that winter. Elder's face, the cave paintings, the clearing where 3 impossible friends sat together in the cold. Jamie has the matching volume. Together, they're the only evidence that will ever exist, the only proof that will never be proven. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice. If Elder would have lived longer, survived better, with scientific protection and managed habitat. But then I remember what Jamie said. Respect means honoring choices even when they lead to loss. Elder chose freedom. We chose to honor that choice. And in doing so, we learned that love sometimes looks like staying silent, even when speaking could save what you love.